Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MMA Dungeon episode 1. My name is Shady Beshai. We are in the MMA Dungeon. This is going to be the start of a new journey for this YouTube channel where I plan to upload on some sort of regular basis. I think I'm going to start with once a week, and every episode might look a little bit different. I think it's very important to have a mix of voices on these shows so that you guys do not get bored and that the opinions are challenged. And so I'm going to try my best to have different people within the MMA media world, maybe sometimes just friends of mine that maybe don't have a huge platform, but are knowledgeable on the topics that I want to cover. And then we're also going to fit in some interviews here and there, fighters, people in the combat sports world, maybe some folks that do behind the scenes work for different promotions. But it's going to be the start of a journey. It's going to be exciting. There's no secret that I'm pulling inspiration from a lot of different folks that I watch that I respect a lot and I love their content. The show is loosely based off of like submission radio. There's always a different guest. It's not always an interview. Sometimes we're just covering some topics. Mike Bond does a lot of content that I love and appreciate and consume. And so those are where I'm pulling my inspiration from. My goal is to give different takes so that you guys are not listening to the same thing across all the combat sports media that you consume. And some episodes are going to be real short. I doubt many of them will be too long, but here we go. We'll give it a shot. If you are watching this episode, that means that it made it out of my drafts. I debated considering this episode 0 or 1. It's probably going to be one of very few where I'm solo, I hope, but we shall see where it goes. Not too many topics that I want to cover today. Again, this is more like a journal entry. Some of these episodes are going to be more like a journal entry. Some of them I'm going to show my collectibles. I'm a huge MMA historian and memorabilia and artifacts collector. I have gloves, MMA gloves from over 100 different promotions around the world. I have ring used and ring accurate or cage used and cage accurate MMA belts, championship belts, some carried by some pretty big names in the combat sports world. So I'd love to do some videos that show off a little bit of those. I have full event used canvases from UFC, PFL, like the entire canvas. And so all these things come with stories. That's the MMA Dungeon. That's where that name came from. That's what I named my little outlet when I began to cover media under my own outlet. I also do some work for other outlets as well, but that's where MMA Dungeon comes from. It's the nickname that my friends and family had given this ground floor, the basement of the home that my wife and I own. And this is the least interesting corner of the dungeon. So some episodes will definitely highlight a little bit of that. With that being said, let's give it a shot. Let's get started. Let's see kind of where this goes. And if you enjoy it, I mean, I know it's part of the job. I got to say, hit the like, hit the subscribe, hit the comment. I'm really bad at doing those, even though I love content that I watch. So I get it if you forget. So recently, this past weekend, I stopped by Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A buddy of mine, we drove up from New Jersey, right next to New York City. So you can imagine we took the entire state of Jersey in that drive, and it was not the funnest of drives, but it was worth it. I think we attended PFL Pittsburgh, which of course was headlined by Johnny Eblen versus Brian Battle. Brian Battle making his debut in the promotion of PFL as he goes on his little world tour, not to be mistaken with Arman Sarukian's world tour. Both of them on world tours for different reasons, but overall, I just want to talk. And if I'm looking over here, it's just because I'm looking at some notes. Episode 1, guys, bear with me, but I assure you guys will find something that you like in this episode and all the future episodes. Overall, my take, the event is incredible. I think PFL has really stepped it up. I know they're kind of that like younger sibling that we all love to bully, especially if you are like a hardcore UFC fan. But I think with John Martin taking office and with a lot of other folks stepping up kind of from the little that I've seen behind the scenes, a lot of those people have stepped, a lot of people that have remained because they got rid of a lot of the team. A lot of the people who have remained are stepping up and taking what seems to be a little bit more initiative. A lot of listening to fans, media, advisors, like voices in the space. And so the event itself, I think, showed a lot of those changes. I don't want to go over a lot of the things that we hear from the bigger creators. Ariel Hawani has talked, quite a bit about The fighter walkouts being an upgrade, the fact that Costello Van Steenis' brother the week prior in Madrid was holding the belt. These are all very nostalgic things, very, very much things that add to the character of the program. The fighter kits have both sponsors and some customizations on them. Like I know Brian Battle. I don't think Johnny Eblin got custom. I know Impa Kasanga and I did. Maybe Dalton Rasta, from what I remember. They all got like custom trunks, shorts. Their partner is Takedown, and so they're doing a really great job. Other than the fact that there were a couple trunks that were pulled beneath, the bottoms there. So they're working on the elastic portion of the Takedown kits. But anyway, the point is, I'm really excited about what PFL has headed. With the direction they're headed in. There are some things that people are telling them to pump the brakes about, and we will get to that in a second, namely the rebrand to Bellator, which I think, in fairness, based on my discussion with John Martin in the media room during his scrum, it might be a little bit blown out of proportion. But then again, a buddy of mine that were there and I have noticed that maybe it isn't blown out of proportion. So it's really 50-50, depends on how hardcore they are on this decision. But that's really my thoughts on the overall event. I think they have the ability to do something great. And my humble prediction is that PFL a year from now will either be doing incredible, like way better than anybody in the universe thought they would be. I'm not saying they will overtake the UFC. I think that is next to impossible these days. It's not impossible, but it's next to impossible. So they will either be doing incredible, better than anybody ever expected, or they will be doing absolutely terrible and probably worse than they were when John Martin took over the reins, essentially. So as I mentioned before, the fights were the main and co-main were Johnny Eblin versus Brian Battle. The co-main was Impa Kasanganay versus Dalton Rasta. Of course, Dalton Rasta was the hometown hero, essentially. Let's play with these views a little bit. Oh, I like that one. Dalton Rasta was the hometown hero. It felt like the event surrounded him, despite him not being the main event. Of course, he is from Pittsburgh. I believe he's from actually Pittsburgh, not like a surrounding city. I might be wrong. It did feel like the entire crowd there was like a super excited for combat sports to be back in Pittsburgh. I don't think the UFC or PFL have been there in quite a while. But if you told me everybody in there was Dalton Rasta's cousin, I'd believe you. But yeah, let's talk real quick about the co-main event. Impa Kasanganay, he walked out first. Of course, they gave Dalton Rasta the second walk as the hometown hero, I suppose, or maybe based on their rankings. I'm not quite sure. Their rankings is a whole other mystery that I'm still trying to figure out. But yeah, Impa Kasanganay's walkout was, in my opinion, one of the most terrifying things I've ever witnessed from a few feet away. It sounded like every single person in there was chanting some sort of boo or some sort of derogatory term or insult, or you suck, or you're gonna get the knocked out, the F knocked out, whatever. It was real intense. And Impa has a way of somehow making it seem like none of that even exists. And I do believe that in his heart of hearts, in his mind, they don't exist. He's walking out to an incredible worship song that I love, that I knew, and so it obviously it sent some shivers down my spine. I mean, I want to preface this with the fact that I try to keep it unbiased, try to keep it down the middle, try to keep it very professional, especially when I'm covering events as a media member. But Impa Kasanganay is somebody who I'm a huge fan of. I've interacted with him several times now on a personal level. Maybe he doesn't remember all of it, but within 5 minutes of meeting me in Miami about a year ago, he heard that I was sleeping in my car for a few hours before my flight back to New York, and he invited me into his home and wanted me to stay in his guest room. So that just goes to speak to the character, the type of person he is. But nothing to take away from the performance. I was happy for him because of the performance that he had, not just because he's somebody that I'm a fan of or I'm friends with him or whatever. I tried to keep it down the middle as much as I could, as hard as it was, having somebody who I'm a huge fan of in the co-main event. But he walked out, like I said, looked like nothing fazed him. It looked like he had total peace and complete harmony in his mind, body, and soul, singing at the top of his lungs to the worship song. And really, it seemed like the words were speaking to him in that moment. I know that he's a man of faith, and he's a man who drives his fight camps and his entire fighting career through his faith, and I admire that, as many people do. But anyway, he walks in, gets to the cage, and immediately the atmosphere shifts. It's a huge, like, it's like a festival breaks out for Dalton Rasta, this hometown hero, and he has like a local jersey on, and he pulls out a flag, and he's doing this. He's a showman to the max. And that walkout was intense. I mean, people are still chanting, "Knock him the f out," and go kill this dude. Essentially, like every time I listen back to the video I took of that walkout, I'm incredibly fearful for Impa's life, even though the fight already happened. So Dalton gets into the cage, and I'm not going to do a play-by-play. You guys have heard this from everybody, but he shut down. Impa shut down Dalton's parade. He shut down the show. He ruined the party. I'm not going to say Dalton looked terrible. It looked like he might have rocked Impa for a second, but it was just such a quick fight and such an intense fight because of the just the tone in the room, the atmosphere of fight week, that I feel like even the people who initially wanted Impa to basically die right in front of them in that cage, I feel like they were won over by the performance because both of them really went out on their shields. Maybe I guess Dalton more than Impa, but they both put it all on the line, is what I'm trying to say. They went out there and they were the true image of two warriors, two gladiators, really battling it out in front of people for both their entertainment and for sport. And I think that Impa's always great with his words, and the things that he said afterwards won over the crowd. And if you loved him, it was just another example to love him even more. And if you didn't love him, I feel like in that moment you kind of loved him. And he, of course, lifted up Dalton. There's a moment of like celebration and that weight lifted off his shoulders. And I spoke to him about this in the media room, and there's a clip about it on my Instagram socials and other socials, I should say. But immediately after, once he gets off that moment of like relief that he won, he goes over and embraces Dalton. He hugs him. I'm sure he said incredible things to him. They both in that moment were very probably grateful that the fight was over, maybe a little bit of relief from both parties, and they kept it very professional and classy, as I'm sure they both, always do. I didn't even switch to this shot. I'm still new to this all, but here's a little shot of the finishing sequence. So Dalton was out for a few seconds. I don't think he was like out cold, but yeah. I have a little bit less to say about Brian Battle versus Johnny Eblen, mostly because I think that they kind of jumped the gun with giving Brian Battle a main event spot. I'm not sure. I should know this. I don't think he's main evented in the UFC. And they also took somebody who is like essentially one of their most skilled, or like if they had a pound for pound ranking, they might have one. Johnny Eblen would probably be up there in like the top 1 to 3 spots or something, in my opinion. And they just kind of fed. I guess fed is an insult, because I respect Brian Battle a lot, and I think he has some incredible performances. Again, put aside maybe like the weight misses and the fact that he was cut or whatever. I think he's an incredible fighter. I mean, anybody fighting at the professional level is an incredible fighter to an extent. Very few exceptions, I think. But yeah, Eblen just kind of ragdolled him as respectfully as I can say that. It's just the takedowns were intense and too easy. And I think that Johnny Eblen, I asked in Atlantic City, I asked Jonathan Coachman, who was the spokesman that the media got after the Atlantic City card last year, when they were still doing their tournament. I think Thad Jean won his tournament belt in the main event. I asked why Costello Vanstinas wasn't rematching Johnny Eblen. I said, like, hey, the tournaments are great, but you guys are handed 2 rematches in Paul Hughes versus Usman Nurmagomedov and Johnny Eblen versus Costello Vanstinas that seem like the way to go. Like, if you are trying to win over the fan base and you're trying to win over MMA fans, those are the rematches that you need to make. And I got one of the most hilarious responses that I think got picked up by more folks than I expected to. I know Ariel showed it once or twice on his show and commented, and the team thought it was hilarious. Luke Thomas, I believe. The point is that the clip clearly was ironic and hilarious to more than just me. Jonathan Coachman said something essentially like, I disagree that everybody wants to see those rematches, and I disagree that the instant rematch is the thing to do. And he said something along the lines of, hey, how about we take all 4 of those fighters, we put them on a card together, not against each other. And I think I might have been speechless for a few seconds, but I basically gave a little bit of pushback, as much as you can give pushback to somebody as intimidating as Jonathan Coachman. At the end of the day, he was a combat sports athlete. I watched him in WWE growing up. He was one of the characters that I remember seeing when I was watching the wrestling with my grandpa. And so there might have been a little bit of intimidation there, but I tried to push back as much as I could. And I said, I think the people want to see those rematches. And at least, if nobody else, I think Eblin and his camp are confident that they were going to win that fight and that Van Steen is caught him in the last few seconds. Anyway, that's all old news at this point. Johnny Eblin just proved that has to be the rematch. I set him up for the call out in the media room, and I feel like he's almost like exhausted of making, like, to Johnny Eblin in this moment, it's almost like it can't get any more obvious than this. And I don't blame him. I mean, I don't blame him. Like, he was a defending, reigning company man, champion from Bellator, got absorbed by PFL, fought for PFL, I think, at least once under the PFL banner. And it was shocking that the rematch wasn't granted. But I get it. I mean, listen, John Martin wasn't in there. They were still doing their tournament thing. There might have still been some weird ideas in the PFL room. But yeah, I mean, that rematch has to happen, and I think it's going to happen. So incredible things in store for both of these guys. I spoke a little bit about John Martin as I pull in this screenshot from my buddy Zach 4 Ounce to Freedom's recording of the scrum. Unfortunately, PFL didn't record the scrum themselves. Shout out to Tawny. I think that she is doing an incredible job, and it's like not an easy task to be in charge of that media room, especially with a company like PFL, where I don't think she has as much of a team or like help as maybe some of the UFC folks do. But yeah, they weren't recording it, so I think we kind of just all tried to cut from each other's recordings and whatnot. But yeah, I got to speak to John Martin, and I wanted to just cover some things. I mean, the name change is the most obvious one, right? I don't think he specifically said, either in response to my question or anybody else's question, that Bellator is the name that they want to go to. We may or may not have seen a lot of the PFL staff wearing what seemed to be newly printed or newly designed Bellator merchandise at the fighter hotel, at the company, the hotel that the staff stayed at. It seems, in my humble opinion, that the Bellator name change might have been seriously considered or like really far along down the line. But I want to give John Martin the grace that I think he listens to the masses and the media and the fans and the comments a lot. And he knows how to filter them out for like what's going to work or what's not. And I think the pushback that they are getting about this Bellator name change is valuable. I don't think it's the end of the world. I just don't like the idea of renaming to a company that you absorbed. When you absorb a company, you are essentially saying that we as a business and as a promotion have outgrown them, or we beat them, right? We absorb them so that we can take the good, which is usually the fighters, the titles, some of the legacy or whatever, and add it to our new brand. So PFL absorbed Bellator. So it doesn't really make sense. It's kind of like a UFC renaming themselves, throwing out UFC and renaming themselves to Strikeforce or WEC or Pride, which I'm sure there are people who are thinking, hell yeah, please do that. But realistically, that's not what a business does. But I don't think it's the end of the world. I don't think it's a great idea. In my opinion, they should stick with PFL and maybe just refresh the rest of the company. Again, I know Ariel has said that. And I'm trying not to repeat a lot of the feedback that's already been out there, that's already out there on the topic. But heck, I think it wouldn't even be terrible to go to WSOF, World Series of Fighting. I don't like it as much as just sticking with PFL, or I guess coming up with a new name, which is hard these days. But World Series of Fighting, which is what the PFL used to be called, at least is PFL. It's at least part of that lineage. Bellator was a third-party company that you guys absorbed because you beat them. Whether you got them for dirt cheap or not, you were a bigger company, and so to rename to Bellator kind of makes no sense. But anyway, that was the scrum. One thing that I did want to talk about is just the timing. This card coincided with UFC Seattle, which was headlined by Joe Pyfer versus Israel Adesanya. And I would be lying if I pretended that most of the people covering the event and the fans in the immediate area surrounding us weren't also either loosely or closely following the UFC card while sitting like floor seats, almost cage side at the PFL event. And while I think there's no way to fully avoid ever overlapping with any other company, John Martin is definitely taking the approach that, like, hey, I am not trying to become number one. Maybe he's definitely not excluding the possibility of that happening one day, but he's saying we want to be a solid number two, or at least, coexist along the UFC without trying to battle them. No pun intended on the Brian Battle feature there. But So my response to him, and unfortunately, we were cut off quite a bit during the scrum with John Martin. There was a gentleman in there. His name is escaping me, but I mean it doesn't matter. And he felt like he was rushing the media a little bit, which I think, like, if I have the opportunity to give my feedback to anybody there, I would tell them, maybe don't rush us when John Martin is fixing a lot of things in your company, and we're asking some, in my opinion, valuable questions. The point is, I didn't get to ask the question of, why are they not exploring taking over Friday nights? The UFC will always be on Saturday, always. They will, bar the White House card, they will always be on Saturday. And so you are going to play a game that I think BKFC is losing when you try to juggle and dance around all their major events, right? If your business model is, we want to always have our main card not happen at the same time as their main card, and we want our events, our big events, to happen when their little events are happening, you're going to lose that battle, because you need to schedule things in advance. And this is something that I learned speaking to Dave Feldman after their card at Prudential, the BKFC Prudential event. I asked him, why are we booking events during the same day, on the same day as giant UFC events? I mean, it's an obvious question. I'm sure you've been asked it a million times. And he essentially said, like, listen, we can't hit up a venue a month before. We can't hit up a venue 2 months before. We almost have to hit them up. I might be paraphrasing, but he essentially said, like, we have to hit them up almost earlier than the UFC would have to, because we are a smaller company. Our competition is greater, whether it's other sporting events or other entertainment, whatever, whoever would use that venue. We need to be there early. We're not trying to go to some bidding war or whatever, given the funds that they have, I suppose. And so they have to book without the UFC schedule being fully out there. And so I assume the same thing applies for PFL. And again, I didn't get the chance to ask him, but I think the PFL should just take over Fridays. I know Friday might not be prime time, but prime time for you is also not going to be when the UFC is on, whether it's, in my opinion, a big card or a small card, an Apex card or a huge fight night or a huge pay-per-view or whatever, numbered event. So all this to say, the PFL should really take over Fridays. That's my opinion. I might be completely wrong. Let me know in the comments, or message me mean things if you think that I'm completely wrong, but I don't know why they wouldn't take over Fridays. Their only competition on Fridays would be the occasional BKFC event, which you're either a BKFC fan or you're not. I don't think that PFL and BKFC are competing maybe so much for fans. I think at the end of the day, every company that's not UFC is competing for which of the UFC fans can we get to additionally watch our programming. I don't think any of them are competing for another group of audience or something, or like a target audience that is outside of the UFC. That's not what's happening. So take over Fridays, PFL, with all the changes you're making and all the good things that are happening and all the things that I'm hearing might be happening. Take over Fridays. Your competition will be, like I said, I mentioned BKFC, LFA, maybe some other regionals, things that I think you would win. But anyway, that's that. One more like tidbit I wanted to mention, like, their socials are doing great. I still am getting the people who are like, I didn't even know this event was happening. If you didn't know this event was happening, you're not an MMA fan, you're a UFC fan. Okay? If you did not know that the PFL was having a card headlined by Johnny Eblen versus Brian Battle in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with a co-main of Impa Kasanganay versus Dalton Rasta, you are not an MMA fan, you are a UFC fan, which is fine. That is totally fine. That's cool. I could still vibe with you. We could still hang out and talk about the UFC, but you are not an MMA fan. I admit that in the past they've done bad things in terms of their marketing and how they reach the audience and how they put out events. I admit that sometimes their socials are missing critical piece of information. Their graphics are missing what kind of ESPN subscription do you need, whatever. But as of late, with the stuff they're putting out, whether it's Mike Peddleton, my buddy, who's doing all the pre-interviews, I think alongside Dan Hardy, with I think it's called like Between the Rounds, with just they're stitching the commentary with the finishes. They're doing the games and the activities, all those like activations with the fighters in the neighborhoods of where their cards are happening. I mean, this is their first card in the US, but they did it for Madrid too. Their socials are on fire, in my opinion. And again, if you're not seeing them, you're just not following the accounts. No, I think gone are the days where we could just say, oh, PFL's having a card, I didn't even know about it. Maybe there isn't buzz. Maybe some cards, the names aren't big enough for the buzz to happen, but they're doing relatively the same thing the UFC is doing. I mean, short of maybe giant ads, like having the billboards outside of Madison Square Garden show, like I was at MSG on Monday for Monday Night Raw, and there were ads for UFC Miami, like all over MSG. And why? I have no idea. New York and Miami are not walking distance from each other, but they were running ads there. So I think everything shy of that, PFL is doing the same thing. So if you're an MMA fan, you should know that it's happening. You probably just scrolled past it too much. And yeah, I don't want to go too hard on this topic because it's just not something I'm interested in spearheading, I should say. Oh man, I have some other tidbits. I'm going to try to fly by them with PFL because this is taking a bit longer than I expected. But I am curious as to what's going on internationally. If they're still doing the international tournaments, I haven't found that John Martin was asked about that. It was on my list, but again, we were kind of, all right, cut off. You're next, and we really didn't get too much out of him. Hopefully, at their Jersey event, which from what I'm hearing is not going to be in Atlantic City, which thank God, because I think that market is a little tougher these days for like a global promotion, which they are trying to be. And I think their approach of like taking on maybe smaller venues and being able to sell them out, I think there's some universities that they are talking to. And as a Rutgers alum, man, I would love for it to be Rutgers. But where was I going with this? Yeah, the internet. I don't know if the international tournaments are happening, and I hope that I can ask about that, or maybe it's answered before the Jersey card, whenever that is. The only thing I would like to talk about here is that I'm expecting some sort of announcement about collectibles. As a collector, and you'll see that this is something I will talk about in many episodes. As a collector, I'm always wondering where some of the fighters' like gloves, their kits are going. I always keep like the media packets and the programs and the breakdowns, and sometimes I'll find like the program rundown where it's like I have a couple that are like for different CEOs of companies. Like if you hang out long enough, maybe I shouldn't say this out loud, but I mean it is what it is. It's who I am. If you hang out long enough, you'll get some of these like cool artifacts, and I think it's a piece of history. And the point is, I collect a lot of different like random, printed stuff from these events. And so one of the things that I have been able to secure is the canvas, the used canvas. Definitely feels like I'm talking too much about this, but they haven't cut out for this one event, for this event in Pittsburgh. They did not cut out any part of the canvas. And I began to hear of fighters having to surrender certain things. I know Impa's gloves were taken from him. If you're a collector, you know that PFL used to be with a company called Collectibles Exchange for all their collectibles or memorabilia type stuff. They left that company and then kind of did their own thing. I think there was like a underlying company somewhere in Europe that was maybe doing the framing and things for them, but they branded it as their own like PFL shop or PFL Collectibles or whatever it was. The prices were ridiculous for this new endeavor they did, and I don't think anybody bought anything from there ever. I mean, fight-worn gloves for nobody in PFL's fight-worn gloves are ever worth like $5,000, which is what they had things listed for. I don't think UFC fight-worn, like I'm talking like top 5 pound-for-pound fighters, their gloves don't go for $5,000. So they were doing something ridiculous there. For a brief while, it seemed like nothing was being collected from the fighters based on the things that I was asking and trying to get on my own. And like I said, with the canvas not cut now, like it seems like there's something going on where they've left that company that used to take a piece of the canvas and put up these insane prices. The site looks like it's maybe losing some items. So I think there's going to be some sort of cool collectible thing upcoming. And I'd imagine that the number of people who are interested in that are probably very small, but I'm one of them. And so I decided to talk about it. All right. We've spent a lot of time on PFL. I'm going to try to keep going a little bit quicker, which I'm really bad at. But up next, UFC Seattle. There's not a lot for me to say that hasn't been said, given that today is Thursday, and this event happened obviously on Saturday. Everything out there has been said by some of the bigger platforms. What I will say is it was an incredible main card. Again, I was like glancing back and forth at it because I was covering the PFL event in person. I think it was the first full main card that was all knockout or technical knockout in like 150 UFC events, some crazy stat like that. Which, I mean, it makes sense. It's very hard to get all knockouts, and there's been banger cards where like every fight was great, but maybe they weren't all knockouts or technical knockouts or finishes or whatever you want to call them. But that's a cool tidbit about it. DJ inducted in the Hall of Fame, I think caught most people by surprise. I watched his like reaction and stuff. There's really not that much for me to say about this that hasn't been said again, but that was a cool thing that's worth mentioning. What I will say is, as somebody who oftentimes has to rewatch UFC events, I am not able to find a way on the Paramount platform to rewatch an entire event, like start to finish, which in my opinion is ridiculous. I don't think Fight Pass has the like events that just happen. Like, it doesn't have like current events. I think they have to go through some sort of process where it's like, okay, this is old enough for us to put it up there as like the whole VOD or whatever. If I'm wrong, please let me know. If you have a way to watch an event from start to finish, from like John Anik cold open to good night, everybody, on behalf of the crew, John Anik signing off, I can't find a way to do that on Paramount. Please let me know if I'm wrong and let me know how to do that. I jumped over Alexa Grasso's KO, terrifying. I am curious, like, does the UFC know what kind of injury her opponent had? Like, is it something that like Macy Barber maybe shouldn't be fighting with? I mean, I'm sure that they know. I'd have to imagine that they know. It sounds kind of obvious. I wonder, like, there's stuff about seizures being said and whatnot. Again, nothing that hasn't been covered by others, and I don't want to waste your time or mine talking about it. But terrifying knockout. Very cool that she got that Alexa Grasso got that finish. I think she was looking for a finish and probably in need of a finish, especially coming off maybe not the best past couple fights. Joe Pyfer's religious enlightenment is very fascinating to people, including myself as a devout Christian and a believer. There's a lot of opinions out there, people saying that this is some sort of damage control and PR thing, and he's manipulating a woman in his life and this and that. My thing is, like, whether he is or isn't, we're going to hear it. We're not going to convince him to be a better. If he's doing something malicious, we're not going to change his mind. I'm not saying don't give your input. I'm always for people voicing their opinion. My opinion is I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, and we'll see where this goes. I've met Pyfer a couple times, namely at CFFC, which is my local like regional promotion. They are mostly doing shows out of Atlantic City and Philadelphia. So I've met Pyfer at a couple of them. There's been a couple where he seemed a little bit annoyed at human existence around him that isn't like friends and family. Like, I think one time he looked pretty upset to just be asked to take some pictures. I get it. I will never pretend to know what it's like to have that sort of pressure or like annoyance. And if I was face to face with him, I'd say to him the same thing, which is like, I get it. It comes off the wrong way sometimes, but I'm sure it's tough being asked to take pictures and autographs a million times everywhere you go. That's combat sports related, and probably not combat sports related. But with that being said, let's see where this religious enlightenment thing goes. Obviously, as a Christian, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. I pray and I hope that everything in his life is getting better. Whatever truth there is to the stories he tells, he talked about taking his own life. He talked about being in a very dark place, and that's not something that I would wish upon anybody. And so, hopefully things get better for him. One thing I want to say about Izzy real quick. I'm just going to throw it out there. I don't want to dig into it too deep. Why are we not booking Izzy versus Robert Whitaker? Listen, I know they fought. I know that that's come and gone, but it's kind of a win-win, right? Because either do it at whatever weight class they agree on. I'm sure like 75%, no, maybe like 50% of the people who hear me say this are going to think it's the worst idea in the world. And it might be, but what ideas are out there that are good right now for Izzy? But what I was saying is, like, it's a win-win in that either Rob is going to get his get back, right? He's going to get the win, or Izzy will now be winning, right? I mean, both of them are kind of in a similar point, maybe Izzy worse than Rob, where it's like, should I hang around? And I say that as respectfully as possible. It's not like either one of them are going to be watching this video anytime soon, but I would never insult them and say that like they can't fight anymore or they can't keep up. These people are like the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. They still beat 99.999% of the world. But that's a cool fight, man. I mean, I'm hearing like people are saying they're gonna give him to Bo Nickel and they're gonna keep sacrificing him. It's not like he can't win any of these fights. That's ridiculous. He was doing really good against Joe Pyfer, which kudos to Joe. He's making that very clear too. But yeah, give him Rob. Anyway, next topic. RAF, the Arman Tsarukyan World Tour continues. I'm hoping that more people are tuning in, because I remember like RAF 1 and 2 and 3. I was never like a huge wrestling fan. I went to a school with no sports whatsoever. So it's not even like I had the opportunity to either wrestle myself or watch people wrestle. But I was always, I think, fascinated by the sport. It's a fight without certain aspects of fighting, which, it's like a mental challenge to me, which I think sports that you have to, have some sort of mental clarity and calmness, especially in the combat world. It's always very fascinating to me. Same with like BJJ and stuff like that. So I remember like I was rooting hard for RAF like 1, 2, and 3, and then like it seemed like a tide had turned or a page had turned, whatever the saying is, and like people really started watching. Like it's almost like it's up there with the second BKFC PFL. It's like the second to after UFC. If it's on, even if it's on at the same time, it's the second screen that you have on. And I mean, Arman Sarukian is, I don't know if he has stake in this company, but man, he's putting him on a rocket ship, putting him on his back and getting on a rocket ship to space. Um, the MMA fighting folks, I was listening to one of their programs today, and they were like, he's just going to fight every month, it seems, or he's going to fight every card. At some point, you and I are going to have to fight Arman Sarukian or wrestle him. And I think it's pretty cool. I get it. He's doing the best with what he can. He's tapped into the little like streaming world with the whole Neon and Jackson, that sphere and whatnot. Pretty cool. It's all you could really do. I mean, otherwise, what are we going to do? We're going to sit here and talk about him not fighting for the title, and that's been talked to into oblivion. But cool to see him get a win. It was cool for him and Giorgio to seemingly kind of mend things at the end. What I want to talk about is like Eric Bischoff is not getting enough credit from the combat sports world because I think he comes mostly from the pro wrestling industry. He's not getting enough credit because Hype was going to put this fight on, and I believe that they will. I think there's some weird money. There's always these like promotions like in Brazil and Russia where like it seems like they have an unlimited amount of money. And Hype was going to put this rematch on like 2 weeks after Georgiopoulos and Arman Sarukian's first match, and I believe it was going to happen. I really do. And Eric Bischoff, I have to imagine, was just like his like pro wrestling brain came on and said, absolutely not. They cannot be even in the same room as each other unless it's RAF. And he came in, that fight got canceled, or that match got canceled, and they rematched. And I don't know if they just quadrupled their purses or what, but they got them both to behave, which is awesome. But I really do think Eric Bischoff is the brain behind a lot of this. And I hope that at their Philly event that I'm going to cover in person, that I get to speak to him and talk to him about that dynamic. I know people have asked him already, like about the pro wrestling world and its influence on how he's running RAF to the capacity that he is. But I'd love to kind of pick his brain a little bit more on that because I really don't think he gets enough credit. And I think people just might not know that much about Eric Bischoff. Well, speaking of RAF Philly, the show that's coming up as well, I'm curious. Marab had posted that he broke his nose or something about his nose, so I just wanted to put it out there. I think that fight might be off. I think that match between Marab and Cejudo might be off. Not huge news and not much to say here either, but his nose is definitely broken. He posted some scans, and the Philly event is really not that far. I don't have the date handy, but it's really not that far from today. It's April 2nd, so I think it's sometime this month. I don't know if Marab will still be able to take on that match. Another fan, you should know who this man is right here. If I can get him on the screen here. There you go. Brock Lesnar. I still watch I started watching pro wrestling a lot more recently. It was something that I grew up watching with my grandfather. And like we watched religiously, we watched every single show, and it's actually what got me into the UFC. Very loosely, it kind of planted that seed because the UFC for a brief time would air right after WWE ended, and so I remember like there were a few times where if my grandfather was intrigued enough and he'd watch like, who's this Chuck Liddell guy? Maybe he didn't know who everybody was, but he would watch a little bit, and I remember seeing like promos cut for Chuck Liddell as a kid. And when I went back and like reevaluated, how did I know who Chuck Liddell was when I wasn't watching religiously? It's because it used to come on after I'd watch wrestling with my grandfather. And my grandfather passed last year, and it was very hard on me. He was my best friend. He raised me essentially when my parents were both like busy working the hours that a child would be working or be awake, I should say. And so it reignited kind of my love for wrestling, and I've been watching a little bit of pro wrestling here and there. I can't pretend that the current product is like feels as cool as what when I was a kid, knowing what I know and being in the MMA world. But anyway, enough of that. It's still cool every once in a while. I think go to a pro wrestling show in person. It'll change your mind. If you hate this, if you hate that I just put this photo up here, give it a shot in person, and I think it'll change your mind. Even if not for the stories or the meaning or the stakes, just the entertainment, just to see the production and the show that they put on. But anyway, Brock Lesnar, he is on his way out of the WWE, which sucks because he's always been my favorite. In the MMA world, he's been my favorite, even though he might not have the prettiest resume. I mean, he was still a beast in MMA, let's be real, especially for the time that he was competing in the heavyweight division. He's on his way out, I think, headed towards retirement. They're giving him a little tour, maybe not a John Cena tour, but it looks like they're going to have him lose to Obafemi, which I think is like an up-and-coming wrestler, very charismatic, huge physical specimen, just like Brock Lesnar. I don't. This is not actually him that's being suplexed here in this photo, but yeah, I think Brock Lesnar's on his way out, and it sucks. I wish there was a universe, and if they didn't do it for John Cena, I don't think they'll do it for Brock Lesnar. But I wish there was a universe where instead of having him lose miserably, they find a way to transfer his fans over from the wrestling fans who love Brock Lesnar, transfer them over to Obafemi instead of making them hate Brock Lesnar. I'm being selfish here. Maybe I just don't want to see him leave being the bad guy, but that's pro wrestling, and I'm trying to do something that's not possible here. But yeah, I thought it was worth mentioning. Like I said, I went to Raw. It was awesome. It always is. I get to carry I have very few pro wrestling belts. Most of my belt collection is MMA, but I have some pro wrestling belts. I get to go and wear a Brock Lesnar hoodie and carry a belt and be a little dweeb for a day. But it's awesome. And it reminds me of when I was a kid. It reminds me of my grandpa. So I love it. But yeah, that's the Brock Lesnar news. I'm only going to really mention that because it's somewhat MMA related, and some of you guys might know who he is. Last but not least, again, going to fly through this. This week's UFC event, Moicano versus Duncan. It's an Apex card. A lot of people are describing this as like one of the worst. It's a lot of what comes off as squash matches. I'll say this: there's very little opinions that I have, or strong opinions I have on either this, what I think is the main card image, or any of the fights on the card. I think Moicano is being overlooked. I know Chris Duncan is an absolute beast, and he might be a little bit closer towards his prime, whether it's like he's on the up and up or maybe on the low. I don't know. Whatever your opinion is on Chris Duncan, I think we're overlooking Moicano. I don't think he's a terrible fighter currently. I mean, his last couple fights, he might have had a bad showing or two. He got thrown into the wolves when he had to save the day and fight Islam Makhachev. Let's not. We got to pretend like that doesn't even exist. There's some fights that I do have comments on, like Tommy McMillan. I don't think he's going to lose this fight. I want to make that very clear. I think he is going to win this fight, but should not be a minus 1,300. And on his Dana White's Contender Series fight. And listen, I know Tommy sometimes sees stuff and gets upset, and I've seen him respond to people in the space and things like that. Tommy, if you're watching this, you'd whoop my butt easily in a few seconds. You'd submit me or knock me out. I know that. All I'm saying is his Dana White Contender Series fight was not as easy as he made it seem, or as easy as he talked about before or after the fight. That's the crazy thing, is I remember him posting like easy money. He went to a war in that fight. I think people thought that it would be easy money, and I think he thought it would be easy money. He went to an absolute war, and he almost had his head decapitated. Let's not forget, I don't know what round it was, but he almost got submitted. He won. Respect to both of them. They're both warriors. But minus 1,300, I feel like Tommy McMillan currently should not be a minus 1,300 against anybody. And this is out of respect to him, to be honest. I mean, they're going to underestimate this guy that he's fighting. And then if he goes and it's a war, I mean, they just kind of made you look bad. They ruined your stock. Minus 1,300 is not only insulting to his opponent, but it's insulting kind of to the resume of anybody that will ever fight Tommy McMillan and put up a war, because they were counted out essentially up until they got into the cage. So we shall see how that goes. I think Ethan Ewing is a huge up and coming prospect that's going to do incredible things. His debut was one of those, like, they doubted him, or like he was being counted out, and he came in and made a huge name for himself, and he's riding that high. So I'm very excited for his, I guess it wouldn't be debut because he already fought, but his first like full camp fight, you should say, in the UFC. And, of course, listen, I'm a fight fan. If I always take this line from Ray Longo: if there's two turtles fighting, I'm going to watch it. And I bet a lot of you are like that too, whether you want to admit it or not. But that's this weekend's card. And that's everything that I had. So hopefully I can keep these going consistently, and you guys enjoyed it and you took something out of it. And how do I add myself back? Still getting used to this all. You'll see a couple of those for the next couple episodes, but eventually it'll all be crystal clear. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. MMA Dungeon episode 1. I'm already working on my, co-host. I don't think it'll ever be a steady co-host, but I'm gonna get some buddies of mine. Some people you know, and some people you definitely don't. Um, we're a small channel now, but I assure you, if we stay consistent, we'll find an audience that enjoys hearing what I got to say. So thanks everybody. Be easy, be safe, God bless, and I'll see you guys on episode 2.